Mm, we're close. Setting up your meeting. Done.
All right, it's live. It's live.
All right. Hey, everyone. Welcome to this live conversation. Thanks for your patience, getting all the technology lined up and everybody ready for this. I'm so grateful that you are on here today, that you're live with us. These are really difficult and awkward times for us as a country. And I wanted to gather some friends of mine from all over the country leading in really beautiful and important ways to help us to learn and to listen and to help us figure out how to navigate a little bit more some of these complex issues that we've got around race and justice and all these cultural conversations that are happening. These people on your screen today that you'll be listening to and hearing from are friends. And I want you to learn from them. They are wise and smart and have done the work to really help guide us in this conversation. And there's a bunch of you that have joined this conversation today that I don't know, I haven't met before. You're new because you're friends with these guys. And so I wanted to just quickly introduce myself. My name is April Diaz, and I started this company a little over a year ago. And as a founder of a company that is all about wholeness for women in life and in leadership and partnering with men in all of those spaces, that includes Black lives, that includes Black men and women. And so this conversation today is really very much at the heart of what we do as a company and who we are as a people. And so I needed for some friends to kind of come on today and help create some space around what does it look like for us to move forward together? What does it look like for us to lean into these times? I want to set some expectations for you as we get going. First of which is that we are not going to give a lot of answers in this conversation. We will ask some questions. There will be a lot that is said, but listening and learning is primary. In the last few weeks, I have felt that there has been a cracking open of sorts, personally for folks and certainly in our country. But it's stuff that has been going on since the beginning of our country's history. And that is why this conversation today needed to be unfiltered. We are not holding back. We are not wasting time. We are going in and we're going deep. We have been cracked open and there's no reason to have any pretense around this today. Meister Eckhart said a long time ago that the shell must be cracked apart if what is in is to come out. If you want the kernel, you must break the shell. So that's what we're going to do today. You're going to listen into this conversation with Black spiritual leaders in our country. And I want you to encourage you to posture yourself today as a student, like the best student you have ever been in your whole life. I want you to grab a pen and a notebook and to take notes. I want for you to lay down defenses and lay down shame, and for you to listen in with that openness of posture. Maybe it would be a good call for you to remove some distractions right now, shut down apps, and just keep your heart open and tender. So as one woman told me, Ashita Moore, she really taught me to say, as a white woman specifically, three things. I am sorry, I am listening, and I am learning. And so I wanted to first say, Cherie was the first person to say, lean into this I'm sorry piece as we get started to talk through these three pieces. And so I just wanted to say to you all, my friends on this call with me today, I am sorry for the way that the church has not showed up until now. I am sorry for the ways that for most of my life, I have been silent and complicit and willfully ignorant, for the ways that I have isolated and put a wall of protection around myself and my story and ignored. There is a lot that needs to be repented for. And so I am so sorry for the ways that myself and my brothers and sisters, especially in the white community, have been incredibly harmful. And so I wanted to start with that part. I want you all to introduce yourselves, and told you all you can start by just sharing real quick your name, where you're from, what your work looks like and how you're feeling today. So I'm going to start with Christopher Harris because he has gotten us into this mess in hosting this conversation. This was his idea. So Christopher, start us.
Thank you, April, for agreeing to host this, and to my new friends and family that are on here. So glad for you all agreeing to be a part of the conversation. Really, the catalyst for me, even maybe recommending or providing some suggestion to April was multifold. First of all, for me, I think that there are a lot of people having lots of conversations across the country. Probably, I hope many of you all would agree, in ways that historically we probably have not seen before. There are people having conversations in ways that they are acknowledging even the tenderness of what April just shared. And there are folks that are leaning in ways that probably, at least for me personally, I haven't seen in recent past. And that's a good thing. And particularly those that are in the church. From all hues, from all denominational perspectives, from all theological leanings and the whole nine. And so for me, because April is a part of my community, and she happened to tag a few of us on a Facebook post, I say, well, April, why don't you leverage your platform to initiate a conversation, which I believe in a very practical way is one of the things that I have been encouraging leaders all over the country over the last 2 months to do. I don't buy the argument when people say, I don't know what to do, because I've seen us figure out what to do in so many other spaces and places. And so one of those things that we can do, all of us, thankfully, because of social media, have a platform. We have influence, we have a tribe, and we can leverage our influence to raise awareness, conversation, and the whole nine. So that's just sort of a quick, I don't know if you asked for that or not, April, but thank you for listening to it. But I'm Christopher Harris. I'm the executive pastor of a thriving multi-ethnic church in Tampa, Florida. Also the founder of diversechurchjobs.com, which is a one-stop shop platform for people of color in ministry to find qualified ministry jobs throughout the country. As it stands currently, there are limited to no options for people of color, and I'm defining that as African American, Hispanic, and Asian, to find quality ministry jobs if they want to serve in ministry. For the most part, they've got to go to other platforms or go to individuals that don't have a context for being a person of color to find those ministry jobs. So we want to fill that gap, meet that need. I also have a podcast, the Wise Idea podcast, and the author of a few books, and a happy husband and a proud dad.
Awesome. Thank you. Christopher Brooks, you were second in line saying, let's do this. So introduce yourself, please.
So my name is Dr. Chris Brooks. What's important to know about me? My life's calling is biblical justice. I've actually got the word justice tattooed on my bicep in Hebrew. I have been married for 23 years. We have 4 children, and I just cannot escape the pursuit of specifically the intersection of racial justice, economic justice, and the body of Christ. And in that space, I call that's where biblical justice occurs. And I think the racial reconciliation movement has been an important sort of predecessor to where we're at right now. But the racial reconciliation movement can't get us where we need to go. We need racial justice. We need biblical justice. So I am currently, my full-time role is I'm National Director of Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion at College Possible, which is a national nonprofit organization providing college access to students from low-income backgrounds. And I also am a co-founder of a company called Brown Venture Group, which is a venture capital fund to invest in Black and Brown entrepreneurs of color. In the technology space, we're currently raising a $50 million first round.
Wow. Awesome. Thank you. Let's go Susie next.
Thanks. Hi, April. Thanks for inviting me. My name is Dr. Susie Sang, and I live in Chicago, Illinois. I sit in the midst of intersection. I was born in Jamaica, and I've been in the US for almost 20 years now. So I have a really interesting intersection with race, ethnicity, and culture, and that's where my passion is. I also just with a friend of mine, we are starting a company called the Change Leadership Institute, which is a think tank for change leaders. I'm the Vice President of Intercultural Development, Communication, and Learning. I also serve on staff at a multi-ethnic church here in Chicago in Logan Square. And I am interested in all things that have to do, especially with women and diversity, women and cultural engagement, the intersections of race, faith, and ethnic diversity, especially with the Black Caribbean immigrant population. So I have a particular interest in them because I am one of them. And I'm also passionate about food and people. So yeah.
Thank you. Cherie.
Hey, what's up, everybody? It's good to be here today. I'm Cherie, and big goal, I want to see racism removed from the fabric of evangelical churches. So it's either racism goes or evangelical churches go. So that's where I'm at. As far as who I am a creative, I'm a singer, I'm a worship leader, I'm an urban activist, I'm a wife, and I've lived in Columbus, Ohio, Detroit, Minneapolis, New York City, Denver. I feel like I'm missing one.
Chicago.
Chicago. That was the 10-year one. And now I'm here in Long Beach, California. You can see how I can get a little discombobulated. It's a lot of cities. So I love cities, and I've learned a lot from the cities I've lived in. And I have a passion for urban culture. And I love being able to really understand diverse contexts, because I think that that will help us come to a solution if we know how this impacts each person uniquely. We understand that there's not one size fits all in this conversation. There are big ideas, and then there's those ideas that need to be carried out in smaller ways by people who understand contextual ministry. And so I really believe in that. And that's who I am. Yeah.
Thank you. Nick.
Thanks, Coach. My name is Nick Roach. I grew up in Milwaukee, Wisconsin, and right now I'm a stay-at-home dad, as April mentioned, of 5 little babies. The oldest is 6, and the youngest is 4 months tomorrow. And my passion essentially is just helping people to activate into their God-given uniqueness, because I believe that in that you're able to create really the inner world and the outer world that you want to see. And so I've been able to do that, thankfully, through coaching for the last few years, as April led me through some really life-changing trainings. And so that's who I am.
Awesome. Thank you. Angela.
Thanks, friend. Good afternoon. My name is Dr. Angela Logan. And as we were going through the introductions, I was like, oh, these are my people. I have found my people. I am a university administrator and academic director. I currently live in South Bend, Indiana. My research and passion lies at the intersection of race, gender, and nonprofit leadership. I often tell a story when I do introductions. My paternal grandfather asked me when I was 4 years old what I wanted to be when I grew up, and I proudly said a doctor and a cheerleader. I can only imagine it was because the Dallas Cowboy cheerleaders were popular at that time. I don't know. However, what I tell people now is I've earned my doctorate, and I am the biggest cheerleader for the nonprofit sector you would ever see.
Oh my gosh, you're awesome. Amber.
Hey guys, I am listening to all your introductions as well and thinking, I love these people already, and also what am I doing in this group? I said an ex-pastor at a mega church. I was the college and career pastor for 7 years at a church in Atlanta. I live in Atlanta. I'm technically from Memphis, Tennessee, but live in Atlanta. And now I do digital marketing for creatives, as well as work for a company that creates curriculums. My passion in all of this is to helping people to become better humans. Honestly, in the end of the day, like I want people to, my heart is to help people learn and embrace who they're created to be in all their uniqueness. And when I say become better humans, I just mean just to realize our humanity and to really embrace our humanity. One thing that I'm really passionate about is seeing that happen inside of the church, outside of the church as well, but especially in the church, because there's a lot of image management in the church. There's a lot of ideals about what it means to be a Christian and all of those things that also kind of intersect with us with race and who we really are and who we're actually created to be, that kind of cloud our reality on our humanity. And so I really just want people to be able to experience, have a real human experience.
I think she froze here for a second. Is it just me?
It's a good freeze though. She looks good.
Yeah.
At least she wasn't like this. That's
It's
good.
kind of dropping a mic.
As we do that, we'll be.
We froze for a second, Amber.
I have no idea what was the last thing I said, but.
It's all right. We can pick it back up later. Yours
Awesome.
great. I'm so glad you're here. Goody. Wrap us up.
Hey, thanks so much, April, for hosting today. And hello to my tribe, my fellow people. I'm Goody Goodlow here in Redondo Beach, California, but I am from a place just east of here called Compton. And I'm an MLK scholar, and I'm a person who is trying to advance the mission and message of Dr. King to redeem the soul of humanity.
I think you also forgot to say that you are a doctor as well. So we got our fair share of doctors on the call. I barely got my undergrad, so. I wanted to ask a couple of rapid fire questions as we get into the meat of this conversation. So I want to ask you all, if you would raise your hand if you have ever felt scared for your safety. Raise your hand if you have had to explain things to people about race and justice that Google could answer for them instead. Okay, raise your hand if you have experienced racism within the church. Raise your hand if you have ever felt like a token on a team, in your work. 2 hands, Angela, thank you. Raise your hand if you have been unnecessarily pulled over by a police officer. 2 hands up. Ooh. Raise your hand if you have had to have the talk with your child or a child close to you. Raise your hand if you have experienced a microaggression at church. And then raise your hand, lastly, if you have been called a racially degrading name, even if it was by another Christian. All right, thank you. As spiritual leaders, those questions felt important to me to ask you, because just because you are a spiritual leader, it does not exempt you from these things happening and happening within the church, right? So that's not news to you, but for those who are listening in, that felt like an important thing to acknowledge and to have some commonality around. So I wanted to have this conversation around our past, our present, and our future, because wholeness looks like us integrating those things with one another. And so as we talk about race and justice and equality today, I want to first start in the past and ask if you all could address this question of what do we need to know, or why do we need to know where we have come from as a country? And maybe what's, if there's some what's that you would want to add into that. But what do we need to know, and why do we need to know where we have come as a country?
I'll start. I have found it very intriguing over the last few years. I've had the amazing privilege as an African-American male in America to attend predominantly white institutions for most, if not all, of my education. And it has been intriguing to me to discover how little historical information many non-people of color have on the true history of America. Not a sanitized history, not a comfortable history, but a true multidimensional, accurate depiction of the history of our nation. Um, to me, I think in many ways that has to be a part of the starting point. To acknowledge, just like as an individual, those of us that are in ministry know that discipleship isn't clean, it's not neat, it's not pretty, but you have to often acknowledge your starting point in your history in order to be able to move forward. And I think in many ways, there is a either intentional or unintentional blind eye that our country has collectively turned to our true history, right? This conversation, I think, will weave in and out of statements and phrases that some may watch this and think it's a political idea. So I'm going to speak for myself and say, in most cases, most of what I'll say today is not tied to a political party at all, but just acknowledging some truths, right? Mm-hmm. It was dumbfounding to me that you had a huge swath of our country mad at a first lady for the simple phrase that Black people built the White House, that slaves built the White House, right? Which leads to this point that I believe, while many people are focusing in on the protesters, individuals that are out in the streets, millennials, college students who are protesting, one of the conversations I don't think is getting enough airtime is the attack on Black intellectualism. And it's this notion where, as a person of color who is smart, legitimately smart, right? And I can say this amongst my tribe here because we're all smart and not intimidated by any other people that are smart. How often we either have to dumb down our genius or intelligence, or have to compensate for other people's willful ignorance. And I'm saying ignorance not in terms of behavior, but in terms of intellectual capacity, right? There is a gentleman that I know, I won't name him now, just for confidentiality purposes. He's an African-American male on a predominantly white church staff. He has 2 doctorates, 3 master's degrees, has written 12 or 13 books, and yet he is under attack because people on the staff are fragile around the conversation of race and justice. And someone had the audacity to say out of their mouth, what makes you qualified to speak on this? One of the doctorates that this person has, and these are not online doctorates. These are 4-year, 5-year dissertation having to defend at white institutions, right? Having to defend. One of his doctorates is on justice.
Oh my gosh.
Right? And so the conversation for me becomes, at what point do you become so blind to not only history, but so ignorant to intellectualism that you cannot acknowledge that a person of color can actually be one of the smartest people in the room? Sorry if I went wrong there, but that's, you asked me to open up, so I did.
Unfiltered. If it's not unfiltered, I don't want it.
So the conversation, even about the Central Park scenario with the young lady, calling on the gentleman, that to me falls underneath the bucket of the whole intellectualism debate. Why would a Black man be out there looking at birds, right? Et cetera, et cetera. So his character and his credibility is in question because he is smart enough to not fit in a box of a traditional media-driven image of a Black male, right? And more specific, this is the last thing I'll say and then I'll stop. More specific to the conversation of the church, there has been this historical perspective that demonstrative preaching is anti-intellectual. I can hoop and holler and sweat and be just as theologically sound as anybody else.
Mm,
I don't have to be one or the other.
mhm,
I'll stop there.
mhm. Keep it going.
So I had to chuckle when you said about willful blindness and historical, I'm going to be gentle and say naivete. About a year ago or so actually, it was earlier this year, Martin Luther King celebration in our community, Miss Diane Nash spoke on campus. And right, I know, I wept just on principle. And as I was leaving the luncheon with colleagues, and someone said, what must it have been like to be in the presence of someone who was on the front lines of the civil rights movement? And without thinking, I said, well, she was fine as long as I kept my bedroom clean and did my homework. And she was like, what do you mean, Angela? My mother came of age in Montgomery, Alabama at the height of the civil rights era. My mother was one of the first Black telephone operators at Alabama Bell. My mother participated in a sit-in in downtown Montgomery. So I know what it was like to be in the presence of someone who was on the front lines of the civil rights era. It wasn't that long ago. She used to fuss at me because she would correct my grammar and my papers. And so I don't know why you're thinking that this is some long time ago in a galaxy far, far away. I have friends literally. So Friday was the commemoration of the Loving decision. I have friends who were born the week the Loving decision came out. So I'm always mystified, stupefied, and blinded by the ignorance of people who have this concept that there was slavery, y'all were free, Dr. King marched, Obama was president, life is good. Sing praise Jesus, hallelujah. Can we just keep it moving?
All right.
On what planet are y'all talking about? If you noted at the beginning, all the hands that went up when there was an interaction with the police. I actually recalled my story to my father this morning, and he was like, wait, what? What do you mean you had an interaction with the police? Yeah, Daddy, I thought I told you about it. Ooh, my bad.
Mm-hmm.
And that's the reality.
I'd like to jump in if I can, because what is confounding to me and where I think we can actually start to make some progress is we're misidentifying sometimes what's actually going on, right? People say that the criminal justice system is broken. No, it's doing exactly what it was designed to do. It was designed to lock up people of color, specifically Black people. And I think all of the institutions that have any sort of white root system in this nation are doing exactly what they were designed to do. They were designed to benefit certain people and exclude and block other people. And when I think about the history of America, the Declaration of Independence that blocked out all people of color, Native Americans were called savages, Black people weren't even considered fully human. The dehumanizing impact of this nation's foundational root system is playing out exactly the way it was intended to, although, several centuries removed from it, it's easy to say, well, that was then and this is now. No, that is now. That is now. I also want to say that when we look at this system that stole people from a land, brought them under slavery to another land, so free labor, stole the land that needed to be worked from people that already lived there, Native Americans. And then we start talking in America about property rights. Well, how can you have property rights when everything's stolen? I just don't get the argument, honestly. And so I think there's a reckoning in America right now where we have to actually figure out how to go back and make right. That's like a dual pandemic, right? Like that was the original dual pandemic. Importation of African slave labor, the attempted genocide of Native American people to get their land. And my final thought is this. What is the goal of white supremacy? I believe the goal of white supremacy is identity genocide of non-whites. And so when you steal somebody from their land, strip them away from their history, tell them they're not human, treat them like animals, tell the other folks they're not human, kill them and take their land, you're trying to steal their identity. Well, my identity is in Christ. I'm an image bearer of God. So that will never succeed So what we have to do now is chart our way out of this from a perspective, a foundation of everybody's created in God's image. If we don't start there, we're going to have the same problem 100 years from now.
Yeah. So I would take it back a little further. First, I'd like to say, just 60 years ago, we were still drinking from different water fountains. We couldn't sit at the front of a bus. I mean, this is 60 years. So in some of you, even maybe in my elders on here, some of your lifetimes or your grandparents, this was life. So that's not too far. So if people are like, why don't y'all get over it? It's like, yo, it hasn't even been, it's only been 60 years since this was, outlawed as far as equality goes. So I would take it back to, here's where I think people are getting mixed up. What happened in the 1800s with the Emancipation Proclamation under Lincoln, right? What that did is it made slavery in the North and South illegal. Okay, it was politically and socially mandated. And to some extent, depending on where you were living, it was shamed. Then from the 1800s, speed up, speed up, speed up. So what did we get there? We got liberation, we got freedom. We were no longer slaves. Move it up to when MLK was in the picture in the 60s. What was he asking for? He was asking for equality, separate but equal, like that whole idea, right? And to get rid of segregation, so that we could have equal access to all things. The problem is, here we are 2020, and we've been freed from slavery. It's no longer legal. We are seen as a whole person, equality. But the thing that I think that's the next move, and I think we're in the second civil rights movement, the next move is we want equity. And if I could share a picture, I don't know if I could share my screen, or April, you can find it, you can show it, but there's a famous picture of what equity looks like. So it's an adult, a teenager, and a kid trying to see a ball game, enjoy a ball game. And one kid is too short to be able to see over the wall, but he's there at the game. One kid can kind of see over, and the adult's getting a full view. Equity is like, all right, you don't need a stool, you need half a little stool, and you need a big stool so that you can all enjoy the game. We don't have equity. I'm about equity, and I think that's what the second civil rights movement is all about, equity.
If I could say, I think everything everyone has said has been so wonderful, and I think I wanted to kind of address the church in this, why it's important for us to know our past, know our history. It's important because inside of the church, we're being taught to be in the image of God, right? Like we're being taught how to find our identity. But if we don't have our history and we don't know our past, we don't know where we come from, before slavery, what is our history? Who are we a part of? What lineage am I a part of? We try to find some kind of identity in what we're being taught. And so a lot of the times in the churches, especially white evangelical churches, we're being taught in the image of American Jesus.
Right.
And Jesus isn't American, and he never was American, but we're being taught that our identity should look like this American Jesus. So a lot of the concepts that we're being taught, and a lot of the things that we are being taught about our identity and who we are, the challenge with that is that there is systemic racism that's happening inside of the church. And so if your leader is white and they're not recognizing that, yes, there is racism impacting how they teach, impacting their lives, how they think, how they have been brought up, then they are then teaching us, people of color, Black people, how we should live our lives, how our identity should be shaped, because they're seeing the gospel through an American white Jesus lens. And so the challenge is, as a Black person in that type of environment, if I don't know where I come from and I don't have any context of my history and who I am, I can easily attach to that, because I want to be, in the image of God. If I am a Christian, I want to be pleasing to God. And a lot of the things that we're being taught are not necessarily God, but they have a taint on them because of our biases, because of systematic racism, because of our pastors' upbringing in that system. And it's a challenge for us because we really do have to, I believe that we really do have to know who we are and who we're created to be in order to really just walk out our humanity, walk out our purpose in life. But that's the challenge that we're facing, especially us in a younger generation, is, you know, we're getting our information from sometimes not our elders, not our parents, not our great grandparents. We're not having those types of conversations. Not saying all of us aren't. I'm just saying as a whole, that we might not have the opportunity to do that because maybe we don't know who our parents are. Maybe we don't know who our great grandparents are, which all has to do with the system of systemic racism. And so for me, being raised honestly inside of a church environment with a white evangelical pastor, one of the things that was challenging is me really trying to figure out who I am and what my identity is outside of what I'm being taught. You know, how do I learn that information and who do I learn it from? And so it's very important for us to know where we come from. It's very important for us to know that our history starts before slavery. It's not centralized with America, and that's what's the struggle for us, is that even when we have these conversations, we start with slavery. Okay, yeah, we were slaves, we were brought here. Okay, well, that's still America Central, and I'm not from here, you know, like my history, my ancestors are not from here, and I need to know that information as well. And so without that information that's been stolen from us, there is a void for us. And there are gaps unfairly for us to know our history and our past. So we're not starting necessarily in the same place that some of, you know, white America is starting, that can trace their history back to XYZ. I don't know where my history is. And so in developing identity in a person, it is important for us to know the context of our past and our history, and to understand that Jesus is an American, and we can't have an American central view on our identity.
Agree. I think that the biggest thing that white evangelical churches want us to do is to check our culture at the door. And that's ridiculous. And I think it's violent to our understanding of the Bible, because when you read the Bible, culture is all up in there, right? From Israel to Africa to Asia to India, and it helps form a context for the whole story, right? And if it wasn't that big of a deal, then why would Acts chapter 2 have to happen? Why would there have to be the tongues of fire and everybody hearing the message of God in their own language? Why would that be the pivotal point? Why would we need the Holy Spirit? It's all in the gospel. So to me, it's when white evangelicals tell us to check our culture at the door, what they're doing is they're saying, we want to hold on to our white power structure. We want to be on top. All you other people come serve our agenda in the name of Jesus.
Yeah, I would add. I would add to what Cherie just said, and I want to tie in what Cherie just said with something that Amber mentioned earlier, and that is that without a proper foundation, if you're a person of color, you could either indirectly or directly get the idea that Blackness is bad.
Correct.
Right. And so I'm going to try to tie three complex things together, right? So there's this idea around the cycle of socialization. There is identity development theory, and then there's racial identity theory, right? So often what happens is an individual has to have some journey that they go on in terms of their own socialization and their own history and culture before they actually, from a discipleship standpoint, have the crisis of belief that Blackaby talks about, right? What ends up happening is if an individual does not go through the crises of belief and discipleship process before they go through the cultural socialization and awareness and development, when their own culture catches up, if they're not careful, they could run from the faith to overcompensate for now having to learn the culture, right? And that's dangerous, right? That's dangerous because we don't need to abandon our faith to be fully Black,
That's
right?
That's right.
Our faith, when we look at the actual history of it and the foundation of it, Blacks are intertwined, and some could even argue the foundation of the Christian faith, right? And then when you look at the Christian church all throughout history, people of color are intertwined in there. I mean, the phrase that we get, the Trinity, came from a Black theologian, right? And there's other examples that we could use. My larger point is that so often we have both internally and externally not done a good job at knowing our own history and using that as a part of our foundation and identity in how we become fully Christian. Dr. Chris Brooks mentioned earlier about our identity as a Christian. We have to redeem our history and culture as we're learning what it means to be Christ followers.
I just want to add a quote, just drop in a really quick quote here. It could be argued, and I would argue, that white supremacy is a false god. If that's true, then it would logically follow that Eurocentric Christianity is a false religion, which causes people of color to have to ask the question, who am I worshiping?
Right.
Now, ultimately, we know we're worshiping the God of the Bible, the Jesus of the Bible, the Savior of the Bible. But when the picture on the wall looks like somebody who just walked out of Sweden, that's confusing, causes dissonance, and at its worst, causes people to walk away from the faith or never come in the first place.
Right.
That is anathema to God. Eurocentric Christianity is anathema to God.
Let me say, Dr. Brooks, really fast too, though, this, because we've all of us have thrown the term out, evangelical church.
Yep.
And I think that's a little limiting, right? I think we just need to include the church in America altogether. How horrible was this for me to discover after college that the founder of Azusa was a person of color. All of the years that I was given that history about Azusa, it was under the lens that this person was white, right? And that's in the Pentecostal charismatic space.
But who taught you that? What was the culture of the people that taught you this?
It was watered down history.
But what was the racial makeup of the people who taught you about the history of your school, Azusa?
Both Black and white.
Okay.
Both white people and Black theologians, right? So think about it this way. If you don't have someone to correct the idea that Moses is Black,
right?
When you see the movie, what do you walk away thinking?
Come on, Charlton Heston.
Right.
That's my point, right?
There you go.
So a part of what I'm suggesting is that, Christopher Harris has to make sure that I am theologically and culturally astute enough that when my kids are watching something or asking questions, that not only am I framing it right for their current context, but I'm setting them up to win in their future context as well.
Right.
I think it's interesting, this conversation, because I think on a global level, there is a real need and an increasing need to decolonize our theology. That is really kind of the crux of the issue, I think, because our theology has been so embedded in a white supremacist kind of rhetoric. And that's a diaspora around the world, because colonized countries have benefited from a theology. I was just in a conversation yesterday, and we were talking about just, I remember growing up seeing in homes in Jamaica, Jesus having blue eyes and brown hair on the wall. So my framework of knowing who Jesus is and was started with Jesus being white and God being white. And I remember going to seminary and having this actual experience of learning about the history of Christianity that predated Western European conversations about theology and Christianity. But that is not a part of embedded white institutions that try to tell you Christianity actually started with the Reformation. It started at a certain point, and there is no equity for or affirmation for what comes before. And it's interesting, when I was in seminary, and I told this story yesterday, I took an African church history class, and I petitioned to have it be used as one of my church history core. And I was flat out told, it is not the same history. It cannot be your core class. I took it further and petitioned a second time and said, but the history, I have no problem learning about Western European history. However, I would like this to count as part of my heritage, as part of who I am, coming from the diaspora, coming from being part of a country that was colonized. I was told again, it's not the same. That history is an elective. This history is the main history. So it's all about presumptions, I feel like. I feel like the core is about the presumption of who you are, who we are. Asking questions about who do people see us as, and how does that get embedded into every part of the fabric of society? Because I think that's what we're seeing now. The uprising that we're seeing is we are tired. We are sick and tired of being misrepresented, of being ignored, of being told that we don't matter. But at the same time, you want the benefits of who we are. I tell people all the time in the diversity space, if you're planning on doing a work of diversity, you can't commit to just inviting me to the table and giving me an invitation. If I don't get served a meal and we don't have conversation, don't invite me. Because it's pointless for me to just sit there and take up a space. So I think a lot of it has to do with presumption. A lot of the presumptions that are embedded in white supremacy are carried around and woven into theology, woven into the social fabric, woven into the political space, woven into every aspect of our society that then creates a narrative that is actually inaccurate. And we're seeing the fruit of that narrative being lived out. So if we actually don't know our history, and it's interesting, you know, Bob Marley said one time and in one of his songs, if you don't know your history, then if you know your history, then you would know where you're coming from. And then you wouldn't have to ask me who you think I am. So if we are committing to learning history, if we are committed to actually owning and embracing history, and a complete history, and challenging the status quo about this is not a complete history, it's an incomplete picture. It's an incomplete picture of who God is, and it's an incomplete picture of who the world is, and it's an incomplete picture of what this really is about. Yeah, that for me is some of where the presumption lies. The presumption is really what is weaving in, and just a narrative that's false, that's just limited. It's not really capturing the full essence of, I didn't learn about African church history until I went to seminary. Why? I should know that from the very beginning. Very, very beginning. And yes, a Eurocentric theology is rooted, I think, and founded on some of the principles of white supremacy. And we are unable to, unless we begin to push back on that narrative and say, actually, no, the people of God look different. We love to quote the Revelation scripture of all nations, tribes, and tongues. But is that really woven into what we really believe and live out? Or is it just a conversation to make it feel nice that we're going to hold hands when we get to heaven and sing Kumbaya? It's not going to work.
Okay,
So
Susie.
it was crazy. Just real quick, April, it was crazy. A few years ago, I had the opportunity to teach in Accra, Ghana. And while I was there, I was able to go to the slave castles in Elmina. And so I toured it. I encourage everyone, once we get off this global grounding, if you have the opportunity to go, because it's the most one of the top 5 most transformational experiences in my life. But the part that shook me to my core was in the middle of the compound, there was a Catholic church.
Correct.
And they said mass every day in the middle of the slave castle. And then when the Dutch took it over from the Portuguese, and they converted to the church. And when they converted the church, they took the second floor and made it a officer's mess, and they transformed the altar and made it a trading table.
Mhm.
So people who looked like me, who looked like us, were sold literally on the altar. And that's what it looks like. It was real tough to come back to work that next week. I had to take a couple of days off for that one.
But that, and I want to touch upon that point, Angela, the complicity continues though.
Yeah.
And I want to bring it back to the evangelical church. I think we can't miss that. Because the truth of the matter is, when it comes to issues like access to people of influence, the women and men who have stood shoulder to shoulder with people in power, with people in administrations. When Dr. King lived, he met with 3 presidents, 1 future president. Nixon wasn't president at the time. He met with Eisenhower, he met with Kennedy, of course, with Johnson. And as I said in an article, when Dr. King showed up to the White House, he was not enthralled by the tea or china from which he was being served. He was not taken aback by the art fixtures, by the invitation that came on the parchment paper from the White. Dr. King showed up to the White House with an agenda. And so what's happening here now is there are very few African-American pastors, spiritual leaders, who have access to those places of influence. And so then I'm reminded just last week, the president was in Dallas, Texas, at a very prominent church where this individual is known throughout the world, this pastor who hosted him. And I'm reminded of things like prayer breakfasts. I'm reminded of spiritual laying on of hands, where people have come to this particular administration in droves, at least as it relates to this particular group of people. Yet when it comes to policies that are dramatically impacting the people that a lot of these people who proclaim the teachings of Jesus are concerned about, there's a misfit, there's a miss, there's a dramatic gulf, chasm. And so what the other thing was happening is there's a quick call for unity and prayer and for us coming together. We're quick to go to John 17, the priestly prayer, but don't forget, Jesus spent the majority of his life up until that point advocating for the least, the left out, and the looked over.
Preach.
We want to talk about the priestly prayers of being one, but remember, he also had a conversation about who is my neighbor to the Samaritan. He had a conversation about the welcoming in of the children, the person with the cleft palate, the one who was considered unclean, the other. And so we did not get here by accident. The people have been complicit in the making of this context. And so what I've been saying, what I've been pushing back here is that last point, when Nathan spoke, when Samuel spoke, they spoke to people of power and influence. There was mentor relationship. There was depositing into their spiritual inner man in this instance. But when Nathan spoke to David, he also admonished him with regard to his abuse of authority. Same thing for Samuel. What we don't have is we do not have men and women who represent those particular hues of faith and expression specifically of the evangelical world, calling out issues of injustice, whether consistent with Micah 6:8. What is it that the Lord requires of us? Or Ephesians chapter 2, do good works, just do good. Just do good. And so that's been my biggest issue, because I'm like you, Chris. I mean, a lot of my teaching, a lot of my work and influence has come in a lot of those spaces where I am like that. Remember that test we all had in elementary? Which one of these is not like the other? I was always that one. And so what I'm saying is there has to be, if we're going to have that access, because everybody's not at that table, then what is it that we have to prove that is transformational, that is concrete, that is impacting the lives of our people in a way that moves them forward, not in a way that only holds them back, but becomes complicit, becomes this sort of go-along posture with regard to issues that demean, that lessen, that cheapen the value of all of us who are made in the imago Dei.
And that's
I think it's interesting what Dr. Goodlow said, because just yesterday, a very well-known pastor did a 3 to 4 minute statement. And in his statement, he said that racism is America's birth defect. Well, the problem with that statement is now we know our history, right? A birth defect doesn't happen by choice, right? You have no control over that. America had a clear choice over racism. It made an intentional, conscious decision. It set up strategies and policies and structures to support racism. That's not a birth defect. So that one little sleight of hand, that one little sleight of language would work if you were talking to ignorant people, right? What makes it worse is that this person's ministry was built off of people of color. Their ministry was built off of people of color. So now this says to me that your entire credibility and awareness to the actual needs of people beyond entertaining you, you are asleep, right? Now, that's one thing. The other thing that I think is powerful that Dr. Goodlow mentioned is that there are not a lot of people of color that have access to these influencers and to these decision makers. And you know, I am probably like just everybody else on this call today. In the last 15 days, there's about 4 or 5 videos or statements that are written by certain leaders that are leaders of color that are supporting in some ways, or at least soundbite supporting what white evangelicals believe. Here's my issue. Here's my concern. Number one, my concern is this. There are roughly 14 to 15 million African-American households in America, okay? You want to pull a few people that support your perspective, but deny the testimony of 14 to 15 million other households. That's a problem. Secondly, if you look at the data, we don't have to get caught up into the third heavens. If you just look at the data, if you just look at the historical and present day, both quantitative and qualitative data, how in the world do you have 1 or 2 or 3 people? And to be sure, I am not pushing back, because Black people are not a monolith. I'm not pushing back on the idea that Blacks can't be conservative. I'm not pushing back on the idea that there can't be Black people in the Republican Party. That is not what I'm saying. What I am saying, though, is that it is, to me, impossible, incredulous, and the height of pride and ego to try to suggest, when you talk to a few Black people who say racism doesn't exist and all of this is a hoax, for you to lift their story up while ignoring 15 million other households. I don't know any Black person personally that can't tell you at least multiple stories of systemic and personal injustice.
Yep.
So you mean to tell me you're gonna listen to 1 or 2 and take a few sound bites and ignore all these others? No, that's crazy.
As
right?
Zora Neale Hurston said, all my skin folk ain't my kinfolk.
so anyway, he's saying don't listen to Candace Owens, everybody, if you're listening.
Well, see, I was being nice. I wasn't saying names.
Stop
So
listening.
we were gonna get there, Vic. She said be unfiltered. What?
She said
Name names.
she said be unfiltered, but I was trying to be nice. I was gonna let y'all take care of that.
But in his work, I appreciate that, Pastor. I was thinking of when you were talking. I was thinking of Howard Thurman in his book, Jesus and the Disinherited. And he talks about, and I use the historical term, but he talks about how Jews constantly lived under the oppression, the policies of the Roman soldiers, everything from where they could worship to literally the amount of bread they could take in a day, literally was dictated by the Romans. And then he takes that and he compares it to the plight, again, the historical term of the Negroes. And he says there's this peculiar sense of marriage that exists where Negroes lived constantly with the fear or with the reality of living what he calls with their backs up against the wall. And so I got an article request today from a professor who, on behalf of an editor, wanted me to write a piece. There's some debate, there's some dispute. There's people within the church who support Black lives and people, but they're reluctant to support Black Lives Matter. And they were asking me, would I be willing to write an article? And I'm praying through that. But I was thinking, you know, it's what we call what we call a difference without what's the phrase? A difference without a distinction. Yeah. In other words, somehow those two are mutually exclusive. And so it is this idea of then us having to choose. And I was reading it, I was thinking about that, and how so often, again, coming back to the responsibility we have as leaders, spiritual leaders, people within the church, what I have been saying for a number of years is that there is not a moral equivalence when you have people who promote, excuse, condone, embrace rhetoric, acts, and policies that are inconsistent with the teachings of Jesus. Like I'm agreeing with you, Pastor Chris. We don't even have to go to the third heaven. When you say there are good people on both sides and one side is a racist, or when you celebrate the history of treasonous acts, forget the fact that they lost Confederacy. They lost. Listen, I'm in LA. We hang banners from folks who won. Let's set that aside. Wow. There's no Hitler high schools in Germany. And so the idea we would embrace that history, the idea that we somehow would allow for someone to impugn the character of a man who has professed his allegiance to the person of Jesus, church-going, single, married to one woman, abiding family, loving family, and you question his birthright, you question his citizenship. You call this man everything under the sun and the moon, and then we look at policies. Under George W. Bush, there were 12 police departments under investigation by the Justice Department. Under Barack Obama, there were 15 police departments. Under this current administration, 0. When you were at a national convention in 2017 in front of law enforcement officers and you're making a speech and you say, hey, it's okay when you're lowering suspects into the car for you to, quote, hit their head. Don't worry about that. These words, these policies have implications. They are real, concrete. Departments, some are acting with impunity. We got a green light. We got a wink, wink. And so my frustration, once again, is that we think we just arrived here. I used to say it this way, stop scheduling your sins. We have scheduled sins. We have scheduled the missing of marks. We have scheduled the devaluing. We have scheduled the disenfranchisement of our people. And I call up on every person who teaches from the scriptures to wake up. Listen, we want to talk about being repairers of the breach in Isaiah 58, but we forget a rebuke came before that. Is this the kind of fast I declare? Well, what are we doing here? And so before we can repair the breach, we can have vigils and call for unity and the church is one, all that. I'm like, hey, hold up, time out. Is somebody going to confess up in this piece? Is somebody going to take responsibility? And last point, over and over again, African Americans have demonstrated tremendous grace in these horrific acts of violence. I was in Minneapolis 14 days ago on the ground. Thank you, April Diaz and family, for supporting my trip. Ahmaud Arbery, Botham Sean, Altalena Jefferson, Breonna Taylor, Jonathan Farrell, Wanisha McBride, Stephen Cook, Jordan Edwards, Jordan Davis, Alton Sterling, Ayanna Jones, Mike Brown, Tamir Rice, the Charlton Nine, Oscar Grant, Sandra Blaine, Phileo Castillo, Corey Jones, John Crawford, Terrence Critcher, Keith Scott, Clifford Glover, Claude Reese, Randy Avens, Yvonne Smallwood, Amanda Dulialo, Walter Scott, Eric Gardner, Freddie Gray, Christopher Cooper, George Floyd, and Ray Shard from Brooks from Atlanta just this week. Here's what they all have in common. All were killed at the hand of police officers, of which none were convicted of a crime. Some lost their jobs. And so there is a consistency of gross injustice. And I'm calling on all people who teach from the scriptures, the euangelion, the good news of Jesus, to stand up, wake up, and be counted for. There is no ground for neutrality. You're either Laodicea, lukewarm, come on, because I spew you out of my mouth, or you all in with the city of Phileo, the city of Philadelphia, brotherly love. You're all in as a church with us.
Yeah. Can I tell a story that kind of, I think, maybe sheds a little light into everything I'm hearing y'all say? So I grew up in the white evangelical church. My parents got saved by two evangelicals that work for like Campus Crusade. They came down the hill, told my parents about Jesus, and they got saved. Then we went to, preschool at a church, and we grew up in the same, it was a Christian and Missionary Alliance church. All the way up till college. I went to a Christian and Missionary college. Again, white evangelical. Then I worked for Campus Crusade, white evangelical. And then I've been a worship leader at Willow Creek, one of the top 5 biggest mega churches in the world. Then I moved to Minneapolis and was in one of the biggest mega churches in Minneapolis. And they were trying their efforts at planting an urban church, which I was supposed to come and help with. And I had to resign because of a lot of things. But, one of the big questions I had, and here's a little girl who gets saved, loves Jesus, goes to Christian camps. And all I'm doing is hearing the theology that guides my whole eternity through the lens of whiteness. So when I finally wake up to my own culture and I realize it's okay for me to be aware of my culture and to love my culture outside of whiteness, I had white people that were leaders next to me saying, why are you only all about race now? Because here's the deal. They thought I was white because that's how I acted. I was drenched in whiteness. People of color can be drenched in whiteness. And so here's where I want to go with this. I had to come out of that space and I had to get to know my culture more. And I had to understand the damage that whiteness had done in my life, the damage it would do in my community, and the damage it does on the gospel. I don't worship a white Jesus. 81% of white evangelicals voted for Trump. That was a kicker for me. I was like, if you can't see this man as a racist, egotistical, narcissistic maniac, I don't know what God you serve. And I said things like this, and it was like, hey, don't get political. Just, stick with Jesus. What they were saying is stick with the white Jesus. Stick with that colonized version of Jesus that we have for you. And that caused a crisis of faith in me. And I literally thought that God was turning his back on me because all these white leaders around me couldn't help me have the conversation about race, faith, and culture when our world was exploding. And it still is exploding. 2016 till now, just keep looking at all the things that have happened. So young Cherie, who never got taught this, is completely confused. I think God has abandoned me. I don't know where my faith lies. I don't know what my racial identity is. I'm lost. This is what makes me do this work, because I think about the little Cheries and the little boys and girls who are going to be raised in whiteness in church, told to worship a sub Jesus that's not even the real Jesus, not know their history, not understand historical context for all the diversity in leadership. And then on top of that, this is why I say equity. I don't care about equality anymore. Don't bring me to your church as a token. I could care less. I don't want to be a token. I don't want to have a little ghetto within your little white church of all the little brown people that stick in this corner. I'm sick of you redlining the kingdom. The kingdom of God was never supposed to be redlined. I'm done with it. And it needs to stop. It's demonic. It is not of God, and it needs to be called out for the future generations who will follow Jesus. They need to know who the real Father, Son, and Holy Spirit is. That's why I will fight against white evangelicalism right now. If they're going to go ahead and wave flags now that Black Lives Matter, you got to get down for real. Abandon your ship. Recognize you built it in white power and whiteness and colonization. Abandon it. I want something new, and I'm calling for you to hire multiple people of color, because here's why. When you hire a person of color, let me tell you something. There's a social determinants of health. You give somebody a job, all right? Now you've given them economic stability. You have allowed them to now have enough money to get proper housing, access to good food, be a stronger leader in their community. They can be more engaged and not stressed out about how they're going to get their next meal. And you give them health care. By you hiring people of color, you do all of those things. And you know what else you do? You set a model for the people in your community when they have options of many people of color. When they walk into a church, when you're out there giving people hot dogs down in North Minneapolis, and they actually end up coming to your church and want to get discipled, and their only option to be discipled by is white people, because that's all you have on staff. Because you look at the top 25 churches in America, mega churches, who have huge influence, and only like 3 of them are people of color who are leading. The rest are older white men leading these huge white power structures of American Christianity. So you have these little brown kids coming into church, and their only option is to be discipled by people that don't even look like them, don't know the history, don't want to know the history, and want to whitewash them. That's why we need more people of color. We need equity. I want positions. And I don't only want positions, plural. I want policy, so that racism breaks out in your church as soon as they even do it. As soon as a white person thinks they just want to flex their whiteness, they will be fired 100%. And if somebody comes into your church and you treat them bad, they will be fired. I want it to be treated just like sexism, just like any inappropriate action. We need equity. I want positions. I want the money behind it. I want equity. My voice matters just as much as yours. And I want policy to protect those people of color that will come into these white spaces and help you lead more equitably and with more diversity, so that the true fullness of the gospel can be preached fully and in context the way it was supposed to be. Until that happens, I will continue to say that the evangelical church needs to die.
When I was in Minneapolis, Minnesota, one of the things I did real quick is I talked to people, interviewed people there on the ground, prayed with people, cried with people, just listened. I did more listening than anything. But in my research, one of the things I discovered is over 92% of the police officers within Minneapolis on that force don't live in the community. And so one of the things that came out of community police initiatives in 2014 under the Blue Ribbon Commission by then President Barack Hussein Obama was this idea of community policing. It matters, to your point, Sheree, it matters that you have people serving within your organization who look differently from you, one, but also are of you. In other words, as we see in LA with the LA riots, what we discovered after the 92, is that many of those officers were coming from outside the community from which they were policed. They were living in Riverside and San Gabriel Valley and different places like that. But in those instances, why is that important? Well, if you worship next to somebody, if you're in the grocery store with Officer Harris or Officer Sang or Officer Logan or Officer Roach, if they are the Little League assistant coach to your kids' basketball team, they're not just a police officer, they are of the community. They happen to be police. But if you don't know the person, if you have no relationship, if there's no, listen, Dr. King said we fear each other because we don't know each other. We don't know each other because we don't spend time with each other. And so the idea of 8 minutes and 46 seconds gone by, the idea of a police department that was already under investigation for numerous events, including an event that took place at their holiday Christmas party where stereotypical ornaments were placed on a Christmas tree with Kool-Aid, Kentucky Fried Chicken, and Schlitz Malt Liquor beer. Literally, do you know that happened 3 years ago? And to this day, it still hasn't been reconciled. Those officers still hadn't been held to account. And so what we discovered is, listen, it matters that you have people in the room within organizations who look differently from you, who come from different perspectives, different backgrounds. You just may have blind spots. We are not saying everybody who's not our color is bad. I don't believe all police officers are bad. And I don't accept the notion of bad apples. That's a whole nother. The philosopher Chris Rock said it this way. There are some jobs for which we just can't afford to have bad apples. He says, you don't hear American Airlines, their new commercial slogan is, hey, most of our pilots like to land planes on the tarmac. We just have a couple of bad apples who fly them in the side of mountains every now and then. So set that aside. If you are racist, bigoted, prejudiced, phobic, anything, you should not be entrusted, as Lincoln said, clothed in immense power with the full weight of the government. They can take your life. And so go be a carpenter, work in telecom, construction worker. But in terms of police, we listen, you're supposed to de-escalate. You're supposed to, all that training, all that, they do psychoanalysis, everything, all that. And it comes down to what you being offended as somebody, got the upper on you, and now you're going to shoot them in the back 3 times or 2 times because what? They're running away from you, and because what? You're embarrassed or because you're angry or what? And so we watch these things play out over and over again. And as I was there in Minneapolis, Minnesota, talking to people, I remember just thinking to myself, this man narrated his own death. And I'm watching the Floyd family. I'm watching his brother Terrence Floyd, a different one. And I'm like, it's one thing to memorialize your loved one. I buried my sister 3 years ago. She died in Long Beach. It's in Long Beach. It's one thing to memorialize and grieve over a loved one, to do that publicly, but to do it over the loved one who was killed publicly. That's like a whole nother, for all the world to see. And so what I've been saying to organizations, I just got an email from a very prominent vice president of the second largest real estate firm in the country. They want to have this conversation. And what I've been telling our department here that I work with Redondo Police Department. I'm a chaplain. I do leadership training. I've worked with Long Beach, Hermosa, LAPD, 50, 60 different chiefs of police I've worked with in terms of conferences. But what I've been saying is to police departments, don't be on the wrong side of history on this one. In other words, we got entities and organizations throughout the world that are adjusting. We got the NFL, we got Pope Francis, we got the military, we got companies from Starbucks to Johnson & Johnson, we got university presidents, we got healthcare industries, we got NASCAR. What? And then we can't have police departments with this posture.
Yeah.
I want to go back.
Cherie has to bounce off real quick, so she just wanted to not just leave the conversation.
Love you guys. Let's keep doing the work.
Love you.
Thank you. Peace.
Thank you, Cherie. I actually wanted to dovetail something Cherie just said. I know that she's got to go, but
Catch it on the replay.
All right.
Yeah, when she talked about the influence of white evangelical churches, right? And I said this on a podcast like right after the Ahmaud Arbery video came out. So this was even way before, we heard about Breonna Taylor, way before George Floyd, all of that. And I am going to call names here, right? So imagine with me just for a moment, if Willow Creek, Life Point, Bayside, North Point, Gateway, and ARC did a joint press conference. And the only thing that we need you to do is to full-throated denounce systemic racism. Number 2, we need you to say that this is not a liberal issue, this is a biblical justice issue. And number 3, we may not have the answers, but we are committed to the solutions. Yeah. Just those names that I called, it would change the trajectory of the kingdom of God. Now, here is why I named them, right? There's a method to the madness. Because there's some other large churches I could throw on that list, but the polity of their organizations are a lot deeper and steeper for them to make change, even within their organizational structure. These folks right here, these pastors, they drive their churches. These pastors right here, they drive other pastors in other churches.
Yeah.
These pastors right here have access, like Dr. Goodlow said, to the influencers.
Yeah.
There are state attorneys, there are sheriffs, there are police chiefs, there are House of Representatives members, there are senators in their churches.
In their churches.
In their churches. And if those pastors called those members that are already on speed dial and even Saddleback and immediately said, guys, I need a private, non-recorded conference call with y'all, like now. All of those folks would jump on those calls with their pastors.
Yeah.
And if their pastor said, I am going to hold you accountable when you do things that are not for the good of all people, it would change the trajectory of race and racism in America. Just those names I called.
I have a question.
We cannot present a truncated gospel, an abridged gospel. And what's happened is there's been a hijacking of the gospel of the teachings of Jesus. And it grieves me because, like you, I was trained, I was mentored for a large part in a number of those institutions, those white evangelical circles, those institutions. And I was a standout. I was one they celebrated. And don't get me wrong, listen, I have been blessed. My adopted parents are my adopted parents, second parents are white. I'm interracially married. Okay, I'm married to a white woman. Okay, so I have been embraced by certain institutions, but I've lost some friendships. These events have put some of those friendships under tremendous strain. And but we can't, in the words of Dr. D'Angelo, have this white fragility, the title of her book, which I highly recommend to every person who's breathing. We cannot allow white fragility to dictate the direction and the course of the conversation. And this idea that somehow we are removed or absolved because we specifically were not involved in an issue of injustice affecting, she argues in her book, it's like you have white privilege and say you haven't benefited from it. It's like a person walking down the street, having people on their left and their right put $20 bills in their pocket as they continue on down the street, oblivious to the reality of they're having money placed in their pocket. And so this is real. You talked about policies and procedures and laws. You mentioned, Christopher, how people of influence and power, when Ahmaud Arbery, when he was on that pavement and those police officers showed up and got the accounts and did the preliminary investigation, they felt they had probable cause on the spot. But you know what they did? They called the district attorney on the phone at her house. Oh, what was that? Yeah, he used to work in your office, huh? Told them to stand down. Stand down. They did not even go to the jailhouse. No handcuffs. You want to talk about policies, you want to talk about the deck being stacked. If you think I can go and leave here, Redondo, go to Manhattan Beach with my son in the back of my wife's Dodge truck with a gun that I don't have, never mind, I have a suspended license to carry a gun. My man had a suspended license, concealed permit, and shoot a young white kid, 20 years old, not because he broke in my house, not because he has possessions of some stuff, but because I think he's the one that was in a neighbor's house. Yeah. Kill him in the street while the sun is still shining. And we go home not for a night, not for a week, not for a month, but for 2.5 months.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. All right, Nick, you were going to say something earlier, and you win the award for the best listener so far. So you can take like however long you need to. Thank
you. I'm learning so much because I'm sure like many of you guys have been asked to be a part of so many conversations and different groups that are getting different messages, and not being somebody that grew up in has had a lot of experience with, say white American church culture. This is all good information, for myself. And so I guess I have really one question. So Pastor Chris, you just brought it up, but say an example of these, these churches that could really have an impact. In my mind, I'm thinking, maybe this is just a simple money answer, but what do they have to lose? What's their fear, or what is the issue? It's just the money. That's what I'm trying to understand is, like when I spoke last week at our church with the pastor, we had a conversation. He's a white pastor. It's a Calvary church down here that we've enjoyed. He's catching flack for being open about Black Lives Matter. And one of the comments, we took comments during the conversation and questions, and one person writes in, it'd be better if you just stuck to preaching and teaching the gospel. And, you know, it's like, you know, it's like, what is the gospel if it's not an intervention, somebody doing something at a time when things are headed in the wrong direction? If it's not the greatest example of that, you know, I don't know what the gospel is. And so I guess I'm trying to piece in my mind together what is a storyline that somebody who could form that question genuinely, and then versus what we believe and we know to be true and what God is actually doing here and trying to do. Help me out.
I mean, I think you answered the question though, Nick. I mean, I don't think that there has to be a whole lot of other insinuations, right? I think it is money. I also think it is, they don't want to lose access or influence, right? Dr. Goodlow talked about it earlier. The church, it is great for the church to have access to influencers, but that access should not cause us to have prophetic laryngitis, right? That access should not be at the expense of us standing flat-footed on the gospel and proclaiming the gospel. We are called to be the conscience of the country and not just be there for convenience, right? And so when you look at those that are in the room and at the table, they are not challenging the power structures. They are doing photo ops, right? If you think about it, all right, Mr. President, you want to have, Mr. President, you want to have conversations with the police influencers of Dallas. Why didn't you call the Black police chief? And you're in Dallas. Why didn't you? Why did you not call
the sheriff?
The sheriff.
There. 2 Black women and the district attorney, a Black man.
Yes, sir. Why didn't you call them? If you really authentically want to have a conversation with Black pastors, why don't you call a Dr. Goodlow? Why don't you call a Dr. Ephraim Smith? Why don't you call a Dr. Freddie Haynes? Why don't you call a Dr. Jamal Bryant or whoever else that you want to call? Right? This is not. And so when people want to lift up President Trump, here's one of the things that I think is bipartisan. I respected President Obama. I respected Bush. I respected Clinton because they didn't just stay siloed in their bubbles of convenience. They went right to the fire. President Bush went and did an open mic conversation with the NAACP, even though he knew he was going to get roasted. But he went anyway. This president is so egotistical that he refuses to even have an authentic conversation to people who are going to actually intellectually and socially challenge his thought process. And that is not leadership. Don't tell me you support his policies. Ask me, would you teach your children to be like him?
Nope. All right, here's the deal. We've got about 10 minutes until we all need to log off. Amber has to get going. She's got another commitment. We've been on this party for an hour and a half, and it's so good. Chris Brooks has to hop off in just a minute here. So Nick had another question. Chris Brooks had a story to tell.
I just wanted to respond to Nick's question. One of the things that I think is really evident for us in this season to see, especially in the white evangelical church, is a lack of commitment to humility. That's really what it is. So humility and deferring to the other is a biblical principle. Yeah. It is a fundamental biblical principle. Read Philippians 2. Philippians 2, Jesus said he did not consider equality with God something to be, you know what I mean? It's not, he knew he was who he was, but he did not decide to say, well, because I know who I am, I'm just going to promote myself and I'm going to do all these. It is a question of humility. And that, I think, is the next round for the white evangelical church, to actually recognize that if you are going to do any kind of work to reflect the fullness of the kingdom and a gospel that is not truncated, you have to sit in a place of humility. And that means learning, that means listening, that means open to being corrected, that means listening to the prophets. I think all of what we heard today from Dr. Goodlow and from Chris are talking about where are the voices of the prophets in this generation, in this season, in this time. And guess what? All of the prophets of scripture were killed. Why? Because nobody wanted to hear what they had to say. So we have to take some risks. We have to be the ones to take the risks to actually speak. And when we speak, we're going to get the backlash, and we're going to get the ostracizing, and we're going to get put in the corner, and we're going to get all of the things that come with that. But it is for the sake of the kingdom and the gospel. Yeah. And if that is not what we are willing to do, and I send a charge to our white brothers and sisters, if you are not willing to lay down your life for us, what is the purpose of you and your Christianity? And I ask you to examine, is this a white Jesus that you're worshiping? Because if it is about power and money, then sure, of course, then you go ahead, do that version. That version works for you, do that version. But that's not the gospel. That is not biblical justice. That is not the gospel at all. So it's a question for me of humility. And that's where I'm struggling right now. I'm struggling to see the humility. I'm struggling to see, yes, you can post 50 Facebook posts about all the things that you're reading. The rubber will meet the road next year this time, when I see you doing the work, when I see your life change, when I hear your voice change, when I see you standing up for justice, when I see your life being reflected of the fullness of the gospel that's not truncated. I'm not impressed. I'm not impressed easily by the things that you're doing right now. I need a long runway of sustainability so that we can actually prove. The scripture tells us, by their fruit, you will know them. I'm looking for the fruit.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you, Susie. Nick, what was your other question?
My last one, it was really just, the reason that I had a hard time speaking was because just this morning, and I don't really honestly know, I don't really have it fully processed yet, but just this morning I was leaving the house to go work out, and I was kind of sharing with April a little bit earlier that, you know, my 5-year-old son, he's been attuned to the conversations that we're having about everything that he sees on the news, and he goes, Daddy, what if somebody tries to get you? I said, what do you mean? What do you mean, sir? And he says, what if they want to arrest you and you don't get to come home? He was worried. He was really scared, you know, that I could just be leaving the house to go exercise at his uncle's house, and that would be it. And so, you know, we kind of talked, and I just said, you know, son, when we're scared, we can pray to God that He will remove our fear. He'll give us courage, and that He will protect us. But the reality is, if I don't make it home, you know, I struggle with what does that do to him? And then if the things that you guys are saying are true, what is the message that he gets when he goes to a church in America to try to figure it out? So I don't know yet, you know, what, you know.
This is the part right here, April, with what Pastor Nick just shared. Other communities have the luxury of never having their child walk up to them and say that. I don't know if Dr. Goodlow or Chris, you know, Brooks, that's on here. I've got a 12 and 11-year-old sons who are getting ready to be 13 and 12. I've got a 17-year-old daughter. My daughter hasn't said this to me, but my sons have been in the car with me pulled over. And the word that came out of one of their mouths were, "Don't worry, Dad, we're going to be okay." Okay. My 17-year-old daughter wants to go out and protest. But as a dad, I've got to sit here and navigate how engaged do I allow my 17-year-old to be in a righteous cause, while also protecting her as her father, right? Not because I'm fearful of peaceful protests, because I've been out there protesting myself, but because I'm nervous that someone that looks like us doesn't always get the benefit of the doubt. So this, what you just heard from Pastor Nick, I believe what people of color are simply asking non-people of color to do is to acknowledge that your experience is not the only experience, and your experience is not always the right experience.
Yeah, thank you.
And I think honestly too, that, sorry, but just what's deeper than that for the church's concern is similar to the question that I was just bringing up that we got, is like, you know, if you consider yourself a Christian already, and your Christian life is unaffected by the things that are going on right now, if it's not redirected in some way or reprioritized in some way by the things that are going on, and like, for example, you know, if you have to choose to be a part of this rather than being magnetized, you know, completely charged, inevitably pulled by what's going on, I think that then that's just a call to really question, what have you really been participating in your American Christian life? It shouldn't be a choice to care about this.
I would like to add a story. I'll keep it brief for time's sake. I was raised in a white, ultra-conservative denomination where I was taught to hate everybody, including people from my own race. I hated Catholics. I hated Muslims. I hated everybody. Fast forward now to earlier this year, I was invited by a member of the Kenyan parliament who happens to be a Somali Muslim to come to Kenya and do some work in Kenya to analyze some things. So I accepted that invitation. Honorable Sophia Abdi Noor brought me over. And what I realized when I was over there was everywhere I went, I was seated at the head of the table. So I am the guest of a bunch of Muslims. I'm a Christian, and I was a very overt Christian. But I'm seated at the head of the table. And everywhere I went, I was treated like I was the special guest. Muslims treat me better than my white brothers and sisters in Christ. How do we expect to have proper evangelism convert anybody if Muslims treat us better than our white brothers and sisters in Christ? That's a failing methodology.
I'll go ahead and just give my closing remarks then really fast, and know that others will share. And I just want to lift up this quote here that I heard from Dr. A.R. Bernard the other day. He quoted the first Black Rhodes Scholar in the United States, Algin Locke. And the quote says, "It almost passes human understanding how a people can be so despised and yet artistically esteemed, so ostracized and yet culturally influential, so degraded and yet a dominant editorial force in American life." April, thank you for hosting us today.
Yeah, I'm reminded of a passage. Thank you so much, April, and to all my esteemed colleagues and those who had to leave. But thank you so much, April, for this invitation, as Earl and company as well. And I'm reminded of the psalmist, Psalms 90, verse 17. It's the only Psalms written by Moses. It's the oldest Psalms. This wanderer, this lawgiver, this prince of Egypt, he talks about his fragility. He talks about his limited sort of power and abilities in that psalm. If you read it, he contrasts that with God's reality. God is not unaware. He's not unwilling. He's not void of power. But then he comes to this request of God in Psalm 90, verse 17. He says, may the favor of the Lord our God rest upon us. Establish the works of our hands for us. Yes, establish the works of our hands. And there's so much to unpack in that. But one, there's a recognition of what happens when God's favor is on us. In other words, a moment of God's favor is worth 100 years of work and effort on our part, right? And so there's something about God's favor. It's a wink, it's a nod, it's affirmation, it's an approval. Listen, I believe we can grow churches, we can have expansive budgets, we can have polished messages and produce great music, but it does not equal the favor of God resting upon us, the nod of God, the approval of God. And then he says, establish the work of our hands. And as if that wasn't enough, he asked it to be done twice. I believe everything that the church is attempting to do, when I say church, I mean all of us, I believe it would not be sustainable or lasting or have a transformational impact if God is not establishing, if he's not with us. And so my prayer is that God's favor and what he established needs to be a recognized reality for all of the people who call themselves followers of the way, followers of the teachings of Jesus, black, white, and everybody in between, and say, we dare not go any step further. We dare not go into Tuesday without a stern sort of evaluation. In COVID, we're all evaluating. We're looking what's in our cabinets. We're looking, do we have enough of this, enough supplies? But you know what? There is a spiritual pandemic that has invaded the church. And I feel as though this is the defining moment of our time.
Yeah. Thank you.
I remember riots of LA. I remember Katrina of 2005. I remember the Oklahoma bombing, all of those having issues of hate and race and culture intertwined. I do not remember what I did after those events. This moment, the Floyd moment and everything after will be remembered not only for an event, but it will be remembered for everything you did subsequent to that moment.
Yeah.
This is that moment.
Yeah. Thank you. Nick, would you like a closing word?
No, just besides a thank you, honestly. You guys have educated me, you guys' voices. I pray that they continue to get elevated and put in the right places, and that the ears will be ready. And just thank you guys for letting me be a part of this space.
Yeah, thank you. Chris Brooks?
I do not really have anything closing to say, except that it is my hope that those who are not African-American or Black folks that are seeing this will really take to heart the experiences of their family. We're family, right? If you're a member of the body of Christ, you're family. Mm-hmm. I just want people to treat us like family. I'm tired of being a house guest.
Angela.
We have to die daily. This is not a sprint. This is a marathon. We did not get here overnight. We will not leave this place overnight. And just a quick word, I appreciate a good statement. My late mother was an English teacher, and so she taught me how to write and wordsmith well. But to quote Faulkner, it's sometimes your messages are sound and fury signifying nothing. Faith without works is dead. Words without action mean nothing to me. We can have a difference of opinion on whether pineapple should be on pizza, on smooth versus chunky peanut butter, and which way the toilet paper should go. Those are differences of opinions. But my fundamental worth and value and the fact that I am made in the Imago Dei, that I am a bearer of the very image and likeness of God, my creator, is not, will not, and will never be a difference of opinion.
Amen. Susie, wrap us up.
All I say to that is amen. I have nothing else to add.
Yeah.
Just amen to that.
Well, my brothers and sisters, I am profoundly grateful for this 1 hour and 44 minutes, 45 minutes. Your words are life, and they are double-edged. They're penetrating. And so for those that have joined us for all of this or part of this or whatever, keep doing the work. This is a lifelong work for us, and it matters deeply to our souls, to the kingdom coming on earth as it is in heaven. So know, for those of you that are on the Zoom with me right now, not on the live, but on the Zoom, know that you have my ear, my trust. I will follow your leadership. I will submit to your challenges and to your rebukes. And as a leader of a company that's formed by a white woman, we will do everything within our power to continue to practice being anti-racist, to be the fullest expression of heaven on earth. And I'm deeply committed to continuing to doing this work for myself and in this company. So thank you so much. I love you. Nick, thank you for bringing such humanity to the end of this call. I love you and your family. So that was just an important anchor for us in all of the conversation. So thank you for your words. Peace. I'll figure out how we do the technology pieces to share this and whatever. We'll also share you guys's social media stuff so people can start to follow you, because we've had really great response on the Facebook Live. So
thank you,
thank you guys.
April.
Thank you,
Chris,
April.
Thank you, April.
Thank you, tribe.
Bye, friends.
Thank you, Susie.
Thank
Thank you,
you.
Angela.
Thank
Thank you,
you.
Nick. Thank you, Chris.
Thank
Appreciate
you.
you.
Everybody. Appreciate y'all.